up on this week's show, the Dreamcast turns 25 with a huge new game.
A Golden Axe secret has been discovered.
And explore building 3D worlds with core design and Rare Limited.
And the Retro Hour podcast is brought to you every Friday with our lovely friends at Bitmap Books. Now, one of their books you absolutely have to check out, N64, A Visual Compendium. Of course, telling the story of the console that completely changed the gaming world when Nintendo went fully 3D. And of course, that resulted in some of the best games ever made. They're all in here as well. Over 150 titles that define the N64. Super Mario 64, GoldenEye 007, Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, Banjo-Kazooie, and lots more as well. And spanning a massive 436 pages. And of course, that gorgeous photography that you expect from Bitmap Books. You can check it out on the rest of their retro gaming collection at bitmapbooks.com. Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 446, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And a very warm welcome to the podcast, of course, a show that comes out every single Friday and brings you up to speed on all the big happenings in the wonderful world of retro gaming and technology, and continues to bring you legends of the industry onto the podcast for an interview in the second half of the show. Almost 9 years worth of interviews. And, there were people that said when this podcast was about 6 months old, you're going to run out of guests soon. And it still hasn't happened. They just keep getting bigger and better, I think, don't they?
Oh, yeah. I was looking back at this month and I was going, wow, we've had some absolutely stunning guests on the show. And, we've recorded quite a few ones that you haven't heard yet. And, they're going to be absolutely amazing, but so is this week's.
Yeah, now actually, the guests that we have got on this week are friends of the podcast who we've had on before, but they work for such incredible companies. And of course, you can't expect to fit the entirety of companies like Core Design or Rare into a 60-minute interview on a podcast. There are many more tales that we've got from those amazing companies. And actually, this is another panel that we recorded live at Retro Messe in Norway when you and I were out there, Ravi, last month for this amazing show that we go to every year. And we hosted all the panels there on stage in front of an audience. And this was actually the last one that we did on the Sunday evening. And you guys all know, we've all been to lots of retro gaming conventions around the world. Generally, by the time it gets to like 4 or 5 p.m. on a Sunday, they're really starting to quieten down. And sometimes that last panel on a Sunday can be a little bit on the quiet side, but not this one. People hung around for this one, didn't they?
And it's a bit of a tradition having Rare Limited there as well. So we've had Rare Limited on before, and we've talked about, if you look in our past archives, Conkers. We've talked about Stop and Swap. We've talked about, the history of how they did the silicon graphics, and then they got into the kind of 3D rendering with Donkey Kong Country. But there's an area that we haven't really explored that was pretty unique, because on this panel, we had Chris Marlow, we had Kev Bayliss and Paul Machacek, but also we had Heather Stevens. Now, Heather has previously been on the podcast, famous for, Tomb Raider, which is a pretty huge game. And she was at Rare, but then she left and she went to Core Design. Now, I thought the really interesting thing about this panel was both of these companies at the same time were on different systems, and they were both going into that 3D world. And how do you create something that's kind of not been out there before? There's not a set path, or there's not a set way of doing it. But both of these companies had similarities of how they kind of approached the 3D world. Of course, you had Rare with the Nintendo 64, and, that had its own limitations with the cart and the design. And then you also had Core Design, and they were going onto the PlayStation, and that was really interesting as well, because they had to try and fill those discs and populate those worlds.
And even the fact of, obviously Core were famous for doing Amiga games before that. I remember playing stuff like, Chuck Rock and Universe and, some of those incredible games that they put out. But obviously learning a whole new system like the PlayStation when that came along, switching most of their development over to console, but also, like you said, learning to build these 3D worlds and learning this very expensive new hardware and techniques like sourcing textures.
Yeah, but
and how that
where
was done
do you
back in
get
the
your
day.
textures from,
Yeah.
especially if you don't have much access to the internet back then?
Yeah, this is 1994 we're talking about here. You couldn't just go on Google Images.
And how do you create an atmosphere with sound and, a storyline within a kind of 3D world. We'd only seen, Mario 64 running around, and that blew people's minds. So it's really interesting. This is because you get a lot of comparisons of, oh, we were doing that. How did you do that? And it's great to have the two really big British companies up there and, their story into consoles.
It's quite funny, actually, isn't it? Because when Heather and the Rare guys are talking, a lot of it is like, oh, I didn't know you were doing that. It's kind of like the learning what the other side was doing for the first time in some ways, which is quite funny. And obviously all happened in front of a very receptive live audience, and there's plenty of audience questions. We tried to cram in as many as we could in the time we were given. So a really interesting chat about that exciting time back in the 90s when the entire gaming industry went 3D and these companies were basically scrambling to learn this new hardware and take advantage of, like you said, CD-ROM and that kind of thing as well, and the new consoles. So looking forward to this one, bringing you Core Design and Rare, the Building 3D Worlds panel from Retro Messe in Norway, on the show in around half an hour from now. Now, if you do want to chat to us during the week, between podcasts, there is now a way that you can do it. I mean, we've had a Discord for many years, but you've actually got a little device up and running now, Ravi, that will let people chat to us via Discord using their retro computers, which I think is very cool.
Yeah, so Discord's great because, you can add in suggestions of stuff that you want for the show, news items.
Can I just say something, by the way? Because a lot of people, I know we kind of take it for granted that everyone knows what Discord is, but maybe there are people listening who've kind of heard the name, but they're not really sure what Discord is.
Discord's kind of like, it's like a social media chatting place, but places have individual servers. It's a mix between a forum and a chat room. Stuff gets categorized in there. You can have some really crazy communities as well. You can have some really calm ones. There's some nice moderation in there. It's a nice place, and it's got a kind of link to the past, which it feels a lot like IRC to me, which was internet relay chat. You might have used MIRC back in the days.
I used to live on that. Yeah, God, I mean, the amount of hours, particularly in the early 2000s, when suddenly cable modems came in.
Yeah.
And you didn't have to kind of redial every 2 hours on NGL or whatever. Yeah, I mean, I just used to leave IRC connected 24 hours a day. The amount of time, even when I went to work, I'd have it open and just chat away. It was like, you had some great communities that I was part of in IRC.
Well, it works on, retro computers with really limited systems, really limited memory, and really early computers. So what you can actually do, amazingly, with the power of bots on Discord, is you can actually connect to the IRC channel, chat with our Discord users using one of your old computers and talk to people who are using their mobile phone out in public, share links, chat between them. And I just think this is awesome. We've had a IRC Discord connection before. There's a load of changes that were going on in IRC. So we changed server, and I've just got to say thank you to Still Void, who's one of our listeners, who basically just sat in the room for like 3 years until I did this, connected, and he was saving the space for us. So I connected to Retro Hour chat, and he's like, hey, how are you doing?
I've got these visions of him like not showering, just like sitting there.
That's it, just waiting for the day that Discord would be connected back up. But we are on a Libera, which is the IRC chat client at the moment, the big server that people seem to be using. There are other ones around, but we are on #RetroHour if you want to join that, and then you can chat with our Discord users. And if you want a Discord link, go to our website, theretrohour.com, click the little Discord icon, and you will be invited to our server.
I love chatting on old machines using IRC. There's something very nostalgic about it.
Feels right, doesn't it?
Yeah. So if you want to join us on that, irc.libera, libera.chat on our port 6697.
Oh,
like
yes,
you said,
that's
hashtag retro hour to join us in there. So hopefully we'll see you there this weekend. Right then, we'll wake Joe up now. Let's get into some discussion about what we've been doing over the last week and what's been happening in retro. And this is definitely going to be a story that is right up Joe's street because, we all love the Dreamcast, don't we? And yesterday, at the time of recording this, or earlier on this week, when the podcast comes out on Monday, it was, of course, the famous date, 9/9. And that has kind of become the official Sega Dreamcast birthday, even though we know it did come out in different parts of the world at different times. I think here in the UK it was October, wasn't it, of 1999.
Yeah.
And in Japan, it was a year before in 98. But I think because of all the media we get these days, because, most of the big YouTube channels are American, probably, 9/9/99 generally is known as the Dreamcast birthday. So it has celebrated 25 years this week since the Dreamcast North American launch, which, as we often say about these anniversaries, they seem to be coming around quicker these days, does make us feel quite old. But 25 years of the Dreamcast, that is amazing.
It's certainly, I am the younger of the three in the group.
Mm-hmm.
And when, like you say, we're coming up on 9 years of the podcast. And when
you're getting into old fart territory now, Jeff.
Yeah. When we first started the podcast, I was like, I'm in my 20s. I'm the young one kind of thing.
I'm the cool one.
But yeah, I'm the cool one. I'm the young hip one. But it's getting further and further away from being cool and hip. I'm definitely the dad of the group in recent
literally.
years. But yeah, literally. But yeah, the fact that anniversaries are coming along, which are, for 6th gen consoles. Wait, no, 5th gen consoles.
The Dreamcast is part of the 6th console generation.
Go on, then.
Definitely didn't just Wikipedia search that.
25 years. Like, I remember my uncle getting the Dreamcast, and like, I was a kid, but I wasn't like a little kid. I remember it well, and I remember him bringing it over and just playing. What did we play on it? Sonic Adventure. I think one of the maiden games, Capcom versus SNK 2.
You got to play a bit of Choo Choo Rocket as well, did you?
Yeah, Choo Choo Rocket as well.
Crazy Taxi.
He didn't have that, but obviously legendary games. Soul Calibur, man. I remember everybody at school talking about Soul Calibur, and it was everywhere. Like, everybody was like, oh, Soul Calibur, man, is like the best graphics you've ever seen and ever will see. But yeah,
I remember my friend had one, and I went round to his house, and this was about 11 or 12 months after release, and the American release, and I went round, and he had the Utopia boot disc, basically every game, and we just sat there like playing it that whole afternoon, and it's such an awesome console. Though I also remember kind of when it was launched, and we were running a video games event in Nottingham, and one of my dad's friends had got like an import or something, and he came and he held it up and he was like, "This is Sega's new console," and everyone was like, "Oh!"
I could just imagine him holding it up like vertically with both hands.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, like above his head, like Simba on Lion King,
and everybody's just like, "Oh my god," kind of thing. That's amazing. What's interesting though? We put this out on social media. What's your memories of the Dreamcast? And so many people's memory of the Dreamcast, which is unfortunate. We all know, the fate of the Dreamcast and what kind of happened to it. I say in the end, it's more popular than ever these days, it feels. But,
it hasn't died, really, has it?
It hasn't died. But what happened to it, in the few years after it was released is, and this is also my memory of how I got a Dreamcast as well. But everybody's memory of like the Dreamcast seems to be, at least a lot of the people who commented, was, I never had one at launch, but about 4 years later, I bought one for a $5 from GameStation.
Because I was similar, because that was kind of the era where, I went away to university then. And I kind of, I've talked about it before, my kind of gaming wilderness years, where I had about a 7-year break from gaming. So I missed a lot of the kind of early 2000s systems first time round.
Yeah.
But I do remember there was a guy who lived at university, like in the dorms kind of opposite where we were, and he was a boyfriend of one of the girls I lived with.
Right,
so often before we went on nights out, because I used to do a lot of DJing in bars and clubs, but we'd often go there to like pre-drink, and he had a Dreamcast. Yeah. And I didn't really like the guy, if I'm honest. He's not listening. But I used to go around just to play on his Dreamcast. Yeah, just to go around and play Worms Armageddon on his Dreamcast. It was such a good game.
Oh, man,
and Quake 3 Arena.
I just remember the coolness around it. Like Jet Set Radio was just so frigging cool back then. And, Crazy Taxi as well, Sonic Adventure, Shenmue. So I remember reading all the magazines and the Shenmue kind of release coming and those screenshots that, your jaw hit the floor. And then when it did actually land, it was like, oh my God, it's not like Rise of the Robots. It's actually living up to the hype. Yeah.
I remember going into GameStation with my friend Richard, and we must have been about 15, 16, because he had a Saturday job, which is why he had money. So this would have been about 2004. And he literally went into GameStation, came out of carrier bag. I think he spent about a tenner. And it was like a Dreamcast with like 4 controllers, the light gun, and House of the Dead 2 and like Zombie Revenge, like, you know, just a bunch of fantastic games, and we just played it like all weekend, you know. And by that point, like, he had an Xbox and a PS2, but like, you know, that was like our first experience of like somebody actually having one, like, you know, readily available, because my uncle lived in Blackpool, so we'd only see him over like the summer holidays and stuff. That's when I would play it, and at Christmas and stuff. Like, none of my actual immediate friends actually had one in their house, but we all spoke about it, because funny enough, one of my other friends, Kadeem, his uncle had one as well, so it was always like, my uncle's got Soul Calibur, my uncle's got Soul Calibur. But yeah, and then I remember around the same time going to a car boot sale, and there was a woman selling an N64 and a Dreamcast for £4 each.
Oh,
and
God.
It's one of my biggest regrets that I didn't buy the Dreamcast. I only bought the N64, even though I had an N64. Like, it was just a weird moment in my life. And then eventually I did get a Dreamcast when I was about 18. My girlfriend, who's now my wife, bought me one from Playtime, which is a legendary.
Yes, that's where I got mine from as well, yeah. Yeah, which is long gone now, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think she got me it for about £20 around 2008, 2007, which is still, you know, still right next to me, actually set up right now. So what a wonderful console.
Well, the Dreamcast gets a lot of love these days, and we've actually got a couple of stories to talk about the Dreamcast to kick off this week's show, including the fact that Limited Run are they've got pre-orders open right now, a lineup of hot new Dreamcast merchandise, which I think looks awesome. To me, this looks like the kind of merch that should have, or maybe did in certain parts of the world. I'm not sure whether this is kind of a reproduction of what was around in North America at the time, for example. But Dreamcast merchandise, it looks very era appropriate, doesn't it?
It does look extremely era appropriate. It's very late 90s. I love the jumper, you know, the Dreamcast logo on the front, and then it's got down the arm, you know, the 999, you know, the 9999 on there. You know, it definitely feels like something you would have seen like the developers wearing, you know, at launch or something, you know, when they were advertising it. They've also released like retro trading cards with it, and like card sleeve holders, and like little like coins that look like pogs, as well as like hats and all sorts of like stationery and pins.
The keychain is the thing that excites me.
The keychain, which is the little VMU. I wonder if that
I think you're missing out on the skate deck here, guys. And
I am. Yeah,
I'm one of these like middle-aged guys that bought a skate deck recently, and I was like, yeah, I'm gonna bring it back. I haven't touched it, and I can imagine this is going to be one that is going to stick on people's walls and not be grinded on. I'd feel really bad grinding on that, actually. But yeah, it does look really cool that they're doing a whole deck.
Yeah, no, pre-orders are, well, actually, they're up and running now at the time the podcast comes out, and they're going to be taking orders until October 13th. So you've got about a month if you want to get orders in for these. Price ain't too bad. Dreamcast hat, $32. The T-shirts are about $30. So about average pricing, I think, for merch these days.
$74 for the deck.
Yeah, which has got the $99.99 on there as well. Looks like you've got to order them from America. By the looks of it, and probably get them imported if you want them over here in the UK. But and they've all got the American... you know, the orange Dreamcast swirl.
Yeah.
So we had the blue one over here, didn't we?
Yeah.
So definitely American focus, but looks very cool. I also love the fact that they've got a console storage box as well, which apparently doesn't fit your console in. It's just for the trading cards. Because at first I thought, new Dreamcast boxes.
I did find that interesting, because you can get the trading cards, which come in like a Dreamcast, like it's like a cardboard Dreamcast that they come in, and then you can store that in the storage box. It's just very strange. It's very cool, but very.
I saw there were coins.
Niche.
I thought they were like Pog Slammers originally. I was like, skateboard and Pog Slammers. That's how it would be cool.
You know what's really interesting as well? This isn't a news article, but the first ever Pog World Championship is happening this year in America.
Oh, really? Are they back
October?
there?
Yeah, Pogs are back apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah, might have to. I mean, not that I was any good at it, but
yeah. What goes around comes around, eh? And something else, just while we're on Dreamcast news as well, there has been a massive new port of a legendary game, Duke Nukem 3D Atomic Edition, is now up and running on the Dreamcast. And this port looks incredible. In fact, this port looks so good, it's got the attention of George Broussard, who, of course, was one of the co-founders of 3D Realms and Apogee back in the day, who's retweeted this and said, "I'll be damned, kinda cool. Those alien bastards are going to pay for porting me to the Dreamcast.
I think it's really interesting because I'm so surprised that this isn't already on the Dreamcast. Because, there's such a big homebrew community on there. And this port looks absolutely banging because it runs so well. When you're playing something like Duke, you really want to have good speed. It supports the high res as well, and it supports mouse and keyboard, which is a really good way of playing Duke. I think it's pretty cool. It's on the build engine as well, which of course there's a lot of games that are supported on the build engine or were created later on. You got Redneck Rampage, Blood, Shadow Warrior. So maybe those ones later on can take advantage of this nice fast port, and we might get some more titles hitting the Dreamcast.
One thing I find really interesting about this is you can also use, obviously, the standard Dreamcast controller, but also you can play it using an Xbox 360 controller connected via an adapter to the Dreamcast.
Huge amount of support there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing. A lot of people are like, well, is this the first Dreamcast game that supports dual analog sticks? Because obviously the Dreamcast controller only had one, didn't it? But it supports both of them using the 360 controller, which I think is quite cool. And it is a free download. It's still only, looks like a work in progress, maybe a little bit more advanced than a beta, but it is version 1.5. There were a few problems with the game that is now fixed. There was a few bugs, and the game performance is really nice now. And there's also save games as well that you can save to an IDE hard disk and an SD card.
Yeah.
If you have those.
And it's important to say it's Atomic Edition as well, which, is regarded as the best basically on the PC.
Yeah. There is one thing worth pointing out, because I've been reading through the Dreamcast Talk Forum thread on this. A lot of people they couldn't get it running on a stock Dreamcast. It would only work with the GDMU, to save them on SD card. And the reason for that is because it has that code in there to save to SD card, which apparently it checks for up on booting. But a few people have been asking Ivan Guba, who's the guy that's done this port, can you make a version that runs on the stock Dreamcast? And earlier on today, actually looking at the thread, he's now just uploaded a version which will run on a standard unmodded Dreamcast.
You're so going to get case designs and all of that kind of stuff coming out soon. Yeah, I can imagine the Dreamcast community have already designed a sleeve for it and a PAL version. NTSC,
yeah, which is cool to see. And I mean, obviously, what a week to celebrate 25 years of the Dreamcast. New merchandise, a massive new game being brought to the system as well. And honestly, I don't think Dreamcast owners have had it this good since the heyday. It really feels like that scene's alive right now. So happy 25th birthday to the Dreamcast, and many happy returns to many more as well. Now, for people that are not into the Dreamcast, let's talk about some other systems. Although this was a game that I did play on another Sega system. I played this on the Sega Saturn. This was originally an arcade game, though, which I've never played this on arcade. Golden Axe The Duel. Have you guys played this one before?
I have, and I do have it on the Sega Saturn, and is kind of regarded as like the black sheep, the disappointing kind of Golden Axe game, because of Golden Axe famously for the Sega Mega Drive and arcade was a belt-scrolling beat-em-up, whereas this was a one-on-one fighter, which was a complete change of pace for the Golden Axe games. And frustratingly, in the arcade, there was Golden Axe, The Revenge of Death Adder, around the same time, which never got ported to home console, which was a fantastic arcade game. I don't know if you've played that one or seen that one.
I've played it on MAME.
Yeah, same. Really good. That's a really, really, really good Golden Axe arcade game. You can get it on like Arcade 1-Up and the Astro City mini thing now and stuff like that, but obviously you can play it on MAME and in browser and stuff. But the reason we are talking about the Golden Axe The Duel, which came out on Sega Saturn, which, like I say, not the best game in the world, unfortunately.
Definitely heavily inspired by Street Fighter 2, wasn't it?
Heavily inspired by Street Fighter 2. Really nice animation and graphics on the game. But what was really strange about it was, in terms of like the canon of Golden Axe, it was set like, I think it was either 1,000 years or 1,000 years after Golden Axe. So it's like a completely different story with none of like the original characters, all different made up fighters in the game. The last boss isn't even Death Adder, which I'll get to in a moment. It's the embodiment of the Golden Axe. So the last boss is just G-Axe, which is just a big gold knight that looks like Death Adder, but it isn't Death Adder. But the reason
I remember them in a character that's blatantly a Blanca ripoff, like a big green kind of monster-looking guy.
Yeah, big green monster. Yeah. There's a barbarian in there that looks a bit like Axe Battler, but isn't Axe Battler. There's a dwarf that isn't, what's his name? Is it Gideon?
Gideus Thunderhead.
Gideus Thunderhead, yeah. But it isn't him, etc., etc. But the reason we're talking about this is this game is now 29 years old, celebrates its 30th anniversary next year. But Hacker, Rings of Saturn, has just found the debug menu in this game. Not that anybody was looking for it, I don't think. But what's most interesting about it, along with lots of different level selecting cheats, and you can turn the gore up and down on it and stuff like that, which is pretty cool, which none of these things were available like in the actual main game, the core game of it. And this is done through a hack. It wasn't done through like he found it, because when I originally read this, I thought it was going to be like he found a button combination on the main menu which would pull it up, but he's hacked the game, as many people do, go into the data of the game and stuff, and has found there is a way to pull up this debug menu. But what's most interesting about this debug menu is the Golden Axe, the embodiment of Golden Axe, the last boss, you couldn't play as in the game, which is a bit disappointing, because especially around those mid-90s kind of like Street Fighter 2 ports and stuff, you would usually be able to unlock the last boss, or there'd be a code to play as the last boss, but there was nothing like that until now. In the debug menu, I believe you have to leave it on there for a while, so if you can't select him, but if you let the timer run down on the character select menu while you have the debug menu open, it will automatically then select the Golden Axe player, and you can now play as the last boss in the game. However, you can't use any of his special moves. But Rings of Saturn doesn't know whether this is because they're not available for you to do, or if they've just not discovered the button combinations to do the special moves, if that makes sense. But I just thought the story was funny that people are still here digging through these old games that nobody's talking about 30 years later.
Well, you mentioned then, basically found it by looking through the source code of the game, disassembled it to kind of see how it works. But what he's done is he's actually made a patch. So if you have got the game, you can actually make your own Sega Saturn disk image patched using a Delta Patcher. So basically all you do is you run his patch over the original game, and then you can access it using a button combination from the main menu, which makes it a lot easier and more accessible. But that's cool. Like you said, I think it's very cool though, because like you said, Joe, who on earth was wanting this in 2024 on a game that most of us have forgotten about? But that's why I love the retro gaming community.
Exactly. I mean, don't get me wrong, me and you both big Golden Axe fans.
Yeah,
but this isn't the one we play, unfortunately. But it's still cool to see.
Yeah, nice to know that every game's got a fan somewhere. Yeah. So if you are one of those fans of that game and you want to access that previously hidden debug menu, I'll link that patch up in this week's show notes. Now, a game that nobody has had a chance to play until this week is a previously lost PlayStation 2 game that was actually one of the last games that the company Acclaim were working on before they famously closed their doors back in, 20 years ago, wasn't it? 2004. I think Acclaim went under. And this is a game that was based on the movie Heat, which was meant to be a game for the PlayStation 2, and also they'd announced an Xbox version that was apparently abandoned even earlier. It was shown behind closed doors at E3 back in 2004, but then the company closed its doors, and then no more was heard of it until, this week.
It always makes me laugh when they say this game was shown behind closed doors at E3. Like, was there like a room where somebody stood outside going, "Shh, come in here, come check out this game"?
Bouncers on the door, so your name's not down, you're not coming in.
Like, I always find that really bizarre. Like, we're going to take this game to E3, but we're not going to show it off to the public. I guess they show it to like publishers maybe to see if anybody wants to buy the game.
Because I don't know about you, it looks all right, but it doesn't look like it would have been anything groundbreaking in 2004.
Well, it sounds interesting. So, the Games That Weren't is a really great website. And, of course, the Bitmap Books book, The Games That Weren't, available by Frank Gaskin, who we've had on the podcast as well to talk about it. And they're actually hosting the files on this. And it's the prototype of the game that's actually been released. Now, the idea of the game is you kind of got different people confronting you, SWAT team, security guards, and you're doing a heist, like a break-in, but there's 4 different characters. So in each phase, you're one of the characters, and you're all helping kind of the break-in, and like all doing your different part to contribute to it. It's cool to see that the actual prototype's out there. The game's not fully complete.
Yeah, I think it's only 40% apparently.
Yeah, like 40% of it's done. Some areas just fly through, but in a YouTube video they're covering it. But I'm sure loads of other stuff can get uncovered by people playing and looking around it more. It looks alright. It looks like it's developed. It's also, they had XSAS people come in, and that kind of happened a lot at the time. Yeah. So it looks all right. Yeah, I don't mind it for a PS2 game. I think you're right. It wouldn't have been groundbreaking, but it might have had a different kind of dynamic to some other games.
Yeah, and I think there's always that case of, when you hear about games, particularly if you're a fan of the movie.
Yeah.
And it was something you're looking forward to playing, and then, you might have read about it in magazines, be looking forward to its release, and it never happened. There's also something really disappointing about that, I think, when games don't make it onto market. So it's cool when we get to play them.
It's an interesting time because of Heat. I've not actually seen Heat. It's one of those films people tell me I need to see. Heat came out in 1995. This game was, meant to come out 2003, 2004.
Like a decade later, yeah.
Yeah, I always find, I was thinking like, oh, okay, that's weird. But then I remember that was that phase. There was that phase in, the mid 2000s where like, there was a lot of games such as The Thing, Scarface, Jaws, all these, pretty good games for PS2 were coming out based on old IPs from like the 70s and 80s and 90s. So they were obviously, Die Hard Vendetta as well. So I think that's what they were going for with it. I just wanted to mention that more for my own sanity, because I was like, really? Like, it's a 9-year-old game. It kind of reminds me of, I don't know if you guys ever played Conflict Desert Storm games, where you would have 4 like soldiers that you would control kind of in,
right.
You'd have like a sniper, but you'd have a technician and a medic, and then like a heavy artillery, and you would kind of, move them around the battlefield, but it was a 3rd-person shooter. Kind of reminds me of that, but obviously you're robbing banks and stuff a little bit in terms of gameplay, but it looks quite smooth. The graphics are a little bit jank, but obviously it's only prototype 40% made. I love the animation for when you shoot walls and stuff, the bullet holes it leaves are like absolutely huge. Like,
blatantly clip art just kind of pasted in place, isn't it, before they worked it out properly.
Which is quite funny. But as Ravi says, it doesn't offend me at all, the gameplay of it and stuff. It just doesn't look very wow factor. But 40%, you don't know where they were going to take it eventually.
And to be fair, most movie tie-ins are not kind of that groundbreaking. They're few and far between. But
and a lot of games like really change, even if they've got to 40% by the time it got close to release, it could have just been totally different, like you said.
And just cool to see what Acclaim were working on. So obviously they're such a big company, and it's interesting to see kind of their last big game they were working on before they went under.
Yeah.
So I think from that perspective, and it's actually come from a developer called Stuart Main, who was the level designer on the game, and he's managed to find this and donate the final prototype of it to the Games at Work. So you can actually download that now. Obviously, not a complete game, but that 40% of it is playable. So you can get a bit of a taste of what the guys at Acclaim were working on before it went bust, unfortunately. So I'll link that up on the Games That Weren't website if you're interested. Now, you're ready to feel even older. We talked about the Dreamcast being 25. There's another big anniversary coming up in a couple of months. The PlayStation is turning 30 in December. Wow. So I remember the PlayStation coming along, and without, spending another 15 minutes going, oh, I remember when this happened. But obviously, you'll be the same, Ravi. We were Amiga users back then. And when the PlayStation came along, that was really like, we need to move on.
I was like, this is where all the companies have gone. And all the good games, yeah.
Well, it was introduced in Japan December 3rd of 1994. And this is actually the official company who are doing the celebrations this time. Sony have announced the first wave of 30th anniversary PlayStation celebrations that actually kick off this month.
Yeah, it's interesting. They're doing a few little things. They were doing a free multiplayer without PlayStation Plus needed. A free trial for Gran Turismo 7. stuff like that. But I'm wondering if they're going to go more into the like legacy of it, and there's going to be some cool releases coming down. I'm sure that they're building up for it, and knowing Sony, they're going to take advantage. I think maybe I was wondering who's going to be the headline mascot for it. Do you think it'd be like Crash Bandicoot getting a piggyback from Lara Croft or something?
That would be cool artwork to see on their website. You did kind of touch on a little bit there of what they've got planned. So over Christmas, they're going to be doing a game called My First GT, which is basically a free Gran Turismo game to give you the excitement of the very first Gran Turismo, it says, which is apparently, though, based on Gran Turismo 7. So not quite sure how that works. Looks like it's going to be more of an introduction to the series. Interestingly, they're going to be releasing, and actually there's already a Spotify playlist to these, some digital game soundtracks, which are going to be released from early October through to January. And they've already announced you're going to be able to buy these from Amazon Music, Apple Music, and other music retailers as well. Looks like they're only going to be digital releases. Because I was kind of hyped about this. I thought, they're going to be putting them out on vinyl, which I thought would have been nice, but apparently not. It's only going to be on like Spotify and that kind of thing, and to buy on Amazon Music and Apple. They're going to be doing the God of War 1 and 2 and Ghost of Sparta soundtracks, Twisted Metal as well, Starhawk and Unit 13.
They're going to re-release Thrill Kill and Manhunt. No, I'm only kidding.
Yeah, I didn't see that one. Although, there is some big events they've got coming up as well, including, like you did kind of touch on, a free multiplayer weekend that basically you can play online games without having a PlayStation Plus membership. That's coming up on the weekend of September 21st and 22nd. So I'm guessing, if that's going to be basically a free kind of look at what's on the PlayStation Plus, I forget what it's called now, but there's a load of like old school games on there as well, which I'm kind of hoping are going to be opened up on that weekend for people to play, which will be nice.
It's weird because if you think like the last big celebration of the PlayStation was the PlayStation Mini that they did, and that was a bit of a flop, wasn't it? It was good. Loads of people love it, but I don't think it sold amazingly well looking at the price drops that happened with it. So maybe they're just going to hedge their bets on, not releasing anything massive. And because that would have been the ideal time, wouldn't it? To kind of do the PlayStation Mini.
Yeah. I don't think they'll try a Mini 2, a PlayStation 2 Mini somehow.
Or the PS1, ONE.
Yeah.
Mini.
Just the exact same hardware, the same software on a new little mini PS1. Yeah, I think that was in line with the 25th anniversary.
Yeah.
And like you say, Ravi quickly became like 10 quid, even though they seem to have gone back up in price a little bit.
Yeah, because they could be modded really well.
Yeah. Like, don't you just plug a keyboard in and press like the escape button and that's it, you're in.
I think it's called like Bleemcast or something, or Bleem. Yeah, I'm not sure.
They definitely feel like they're playing it safe with this. Like you say, digital releases of songs. They are releasing a board game called Shapes of Play, which I'm not too sure, but it doesn't seem to be, I don't know. It's like, I'm hoping they announce a lot more because of it.
Yeah, it feels like this is just the initial teaser to me, and there's going to be more to come.
Yeah, it doesn't feel that big for me. And like, it's the 30th anniversary of PlayStation. Like, to me, it should be more PlayStation is in the original PlayStation, but it just seems to be more, which I get because it's still huge and it's very successful. Just seems to be a celebration of PlayStation in general. So all of them.
Bleem Sync, sorry, that's what it was called.
So
yeah, we even look at the games that they're promoting for the online multiplayer weekend. It's Modern Warfare 3.
Yeah,
it's EA Sports.
We could get more sign-ups to PlayStation.
Yeah, that's plainly what it is. They're not promoting the fact that you can play Tomb Raider 1 on there for the weekend, which I'd like to see them do.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. Yeah, I'd prefer to see something like that than here's a God of War soundtrack. Don't get me wrong, God of War's huge. I know it's a fantastic game, and it's a big PlayStation IP and has been for 20 years. Maybe I'm just being a grumpy old man. I'm like, but I am very much like, where's Crash Bandicoot?
My legacy.
Yeah.
Well, this is only announced this week, and obviously there is, it's only September now. This is not until December. So maybe by the time we get nearer Christmas, there will be some more announcements. But yeah, if anyone from Sony is listening, come on, let's make it a proper celebration of the PlayStation 1. That's what we all want, isn't it? Us old guys, us old farts.
Yep.
So, yeah. And I think, younger generations as well, I think it's always interesting to kind of look back at where things began. I'm sure there will be an interest outside of just our demographic. So if you want to check out the announcements so far, I will link that, and of course all the rest of the stories. You don't have to Google around and save you the job every week. You can head to the show notes section of the podcast app, or head to the website theretrohour.com. Right then, patrons, stay tuned. We have got some extra news stories on the way just for you. Of course, we do that every week on the podcast. Patrons get 2 or 3 extra stories because we chop all the adverts out. So if you'd like to join our patrons community, a little reminder, all the details to support the podcast are at theretrohour.com. And before we hop into the panel that we recorded live in Norway with Rare and Core Design, let's take a quick second to give a huge thank you to this week's sponsor. And of course, it is a regular sponsor of the Retro Hour podcast. You all know the sound by now. That's the sound of making money on Shopify. And we've had a lot of experience of using Shopify, particularly over the last few weeks. You've been hearing that in your sleep, Ravi, that noise.
Yeah, I set up the Retro Hour store on Shopify, and it's been absolutely solid. It's great because, it works out all the postage and the correct regions to post to. So, I've had people like, oh, could you post to this region? And I'm like, sure, just works it out and then adds it. It's really simple to use. I can do my label printing within there. It takes payments fantastically. But also I could do that if I was out and about as well with a little point of sales unit. You can even do it with your phone as well, which is really great. It's just absolutely fantastic. Really good for anybody that wants to do e-commerce, and it's got 24-hour support as well.
Yeah, you did mention to me that you're kind of blown away about how easy it is to use.
Yeah, I used to set all this stuff up myself, and it was a nightmare. And
WordPress plugins and all that.
Updating it, trying to maintain it all, and it's all just done through Shopify.
Yeah, so if you're one of these many people who right now is starting a bit of a side hustle up or thinking about it or even becoming your own boss, Shopify is the all-in-one commerce platform to start, run, and grow your business. And it's revolutionizing millions of businesses worldwide. Like we said, we're selling our books on there as well. Really taking all the pain and the effort out of doing that. So simple. And if you're selling anything in line, or like Ravi said, doesn't have to be online. It could be in person as well with the little point of sale systems they've got too. It even gets you selling across your social media marketplaces like Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And it's full of industry-leading tools ready to ignite your growth and give you complete control over your business without all the hard work. You don't have to learn new skills, no design, no coding, nothing like that. They take care of all of that for you. So if you sell anything at all, it is time to get serious about selling and get Shopify today. And of course, you know us. We always get you a great offer with our sponsors as a thank you for supporting us. So if you'd like to try out Shopify, and of course, give us a little kickback to the podcast, let them know that we sent you, head to this website and you can try it out for just £1 a month. A no-brainer. £1 a month for a trial period at shopify.co.uk/retro hour. So that's all lowercase. I'll put it in this week's show notes as well, so you can click straight through. Shopify.co.uk/retro hour and get ready to take your business to the next level today and hear a lot more of this. Right then, well, thank you for checking out the news this week. We'll have more for you on next Friday's podcast. A reminder, we do have a Discord server. You can join us on there via your modern device or your retro machine via IRC. There's actually a channel in there dedicated to giving us news stories as well, isn't there, Ravi? So people spotting you in the week.
Just drop your news stories in there, and it's always good. And also guest suggestions as well, who you'd like to see on the podcast. And if you can't do that, support us with a review on iTunes.
Yes. Or any platform that you can leave reviews on. They all really help get us up the charts again. We've had some nice chart positions over the last few weeks, so appreciate everyone that's been doing that. Please keep them coming, really helps us out. Right, next, going to go back to Norway again for another incredible panel that we recorded at Retro Messe last month, this time exploring the switch to 3D back in the mid-90s, a Core Design and Rare with Chris Marlow, Kev Bayliss, Paul Machacek and Heather Stevens. They're next on the Retro Hour podcast. It wouldn't be Retro Messe without the crew from Rare. And please give a warm welcome. Joining us for the first time, Heather Stevens.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
We also have Kev Bayliss.
Hello. I think you want to pull yours down.
Chris Marlow. And Paul Machacek.
Hello, operator.
Now, I'm sure that, as the old saying goes, you need no introduction, but we'll do it anyway, just so it's there on the record. Start with you, Heather, and we'll go down the line. Just please introduce yourself and tell us what your role is/was at Rare.
Okay, so I have a very long career in computer games. I joined during your 8-bit era of computer games, and I left sort of early 90s. So I was there from 1987 to around about 91, I think, 92.
Kev? I started in 1987, shortly before Heather. Stayed there till 2005. So, fair chunk. But I'm a lightweight now.
Chris?
I joined Rare in 1996. Been there 28 years. Joined just in time for Killer Instinct Gold. The end of Killer Instinct Gold development went on to what became Conker's Bad Fur Day, and I am currently the principal gameplay engineer on Sea of Thieves.
And Paul?
I joined a few months after Kevin in 1988. I left in some point in the future. It hasn't happened yet. So it's 36 years. I was hired to write software, but I've done other things since then. I'm currently the director of quality at Rare.
I was wondering, Heather, then how did you start at Rare? Like, what was your introduction to the job?
So getting a job anyway in the computer industry at the time was unlike now, where you can go online and you can research. Then it was literally an advertisement in a local newspaper. So I opened the local Tamworth Herald and saw an advert it had the Rare logo at the top. Graphics designers wanted. Must have a keen interest in illustration. No experience necessary. Just apply at this number. And I literally just give them a ring. I turned up with a few sheets of ZX Spectrum grid paper and a few designs on it. I think 2 things, being a novelty woman and also being the only person at the interview that decided to actually pixelate my artwork.
Nice.
Kind of got me the job at Rare. And actually the first game that I worked on was with Paul Machacek. So that would have been
Super Off-Road.
Yeah.
In 1989.
It was. Yeah.
What do you remember about those, like when you first started those early days there?
Well, I can remember getting the job because I'd always had, prior to that, I worked with children, so I was working in nurseries. I can honestly say that's probably the hardest job I've ever done in my life. But I just knew I needed a change, and I'd always had this interest in art. I was constantly drawing. I was a 70s kid, and all you ever got for Christmas was a colouring book and some crayons. But actually, that was everything to me, and more drawing gear. And that we didn't have phones, we didn't have games, so all you did all day was draw. I was one of those geeky kids that just sat around drawing all day. I also had quite a dark edge to my drawings, and I wasn't a little girl who drew kind of fairies and princesses. They were always demons and dragons. So I kind of got the edge on the dark side. And I think, again, that was one of the reasons when I went to Rare, I probably stood out a little bit from some of the people that were going there. Yeah, and the introduction to Paul and the whole wonderful world of 8-bit graphics, which some of you had the pleasure of decoding over the last couple of days with me.
Well, one thing as well that obviously Rare became famous for was 3D. And, you know, I'd like to explore a bit more about these kind of building 3D worlds. And obviously when you went to core design, and we'll get into that as well. But I mean, is it fair to say, Kev, would you say that, you know, Rare's 3D experiments really started with Donkey Kong Country? And do you remember when the 3D hardware arrived in the office and what the learning curve was?
Tim had been looking at some brochures about lots of graphics, the kind of things that you would see on a TV commercial for like BMW, to see some wireframe wheels turning around, some CAD, and they would all look very technical. And I didn't really know what it was that he was looking at on his desk. And I sort of just asked him the questions, what's all of this? I thought he was buying himself another car or another toy or something. And he says, yeah, we're going to get one of these. And this was just at a point we were just sort of moving into Super Nintendo territory. And I couldn't really understand what he was envisioning we did with this technology, because obviously a Super Nintendo isn't it's not this high-end computer. So he got one ordered, and we had a look at some software at various different companies to go and evaluate which was the best software to use, what are they using on TV for this and that and the other. And it didn't really occur to me that what you would do is build something and then that would produce a picture, which you would turn into a sprite, which would become a character or whatever, and then you'd render a sequence of pictures to make the animation. And then I tried that out when we got the first machine. It arrived downstairs, and we were just going through the process of moving building inside another floor and making room for more employees. And Tim moved up to another office. And because he didn't want to move the PC, the new SGI machine up into his new office, he wanted the new swankier, updated model, which had just come out. So he ordered that and left the other machine downstairs for me to use. And I started experimenting. And I think at the time I was working on the Battletoad coin-up game with Chris Sutherland and Greg Mayles. And we were coming to the end of the project. But I'd been playing with the 3D software and starting to build sort of metal characters like the big Talos character from Jason and the Argonauts made of chrome because it was the typical kind of thing you would model. And I thought I can probably use this to render something big for the end of the Battletoads game. And so I found a way of modeling a great big, it was just a sphere with a texture on it which repeated like a checkerball pattern. And of course, if the checkerball rotates so many degrees, that repeated section just, you only needed sort of 8 frames to make it look like it was doing a full rotation if you looped it. So I did that, and we had some sprite scaling capability on the was it the Raspberry that we were doing that game on?
Yeah,
I think so. Yeah. Which was the hardware that Chris Stamford developed for the arcade. And I rendered a sequence of about 10 frames or so of this ball doing this. And then we scaled that up, and it worked. And these balls were sort of rolling towards the screen. It looked kind of three-dimensional. So then I built a spaceship, and there's a horizontal scrolling level on Battletoads where they're all in a spaceship and they're shooting sort of R-type style aliens around you. And I just made this, again, this very primitive looking ship sort of tilt one way and then the other, and it just sat there in the middle of the screen, and it was rocking like this. And it, compared to anything I could ever have drawn, it just looked extremely solid and realistic. I think before that, we'd always, there was games like Jet Boat and RC Pro-Am. We'd built our own kind of rotoscoping system where we would fire a camera at a small object like a boat, a model boat or a model car, and we'd spin that round, take lots of pictures of it, and then pixelate it in the way that Heather was explaining. So basically, we'd got that technology then. We had our own camera all built digitally, and so we could build anything. And so we just started experimenting with that and making more characters, and that was our start of our journey with 3D.
Well, I was thinking, Paul, do you think that kind of investment and that look for the vision of the future from the Stampers really helped Rare stand out as well? Because there were lots of companies that stuck with 2D stuff, didn't continue, and did that help them also start to embrace the next generation of consoles that were coming out?
It was quite a jump, actually. I mean, Heather has been showing some artwork done by hand on a grid, just pixel artwork done with marker pens. That's how we did all of the art at Rare at that time. Suddenly we had a machine there, and there was the first SGI machine. It was a big cube that sat on the floor, and it had a demo on it, and there was a Volkswagen Beetle car. It was chrome, it was shiny, wasn't it? And it was just spinning around really smoothly on the screen. And we're looking at that, and then we're looking at the artwork on paper, and the fact we've got at the time we were predominantly working on an NES, and we'd done some Game Boy games, and we're going, how on earth? What was Tim thinking? How on earth are we going to take what's on the screen here, spinning around shiny in front of us, looking like the future, and put it onto something with very few colors and palettes, you know? And a ton of the work that they did was trying to find a way to take these renders that came out of that machine and then cut them down to the resolution and fit them in the palettes, in the limited color palettes that we had at that time. And it was just such a leap. There was no smooth transition from drawing stuff on paper, then having a simple editor, then building up to this futuristic rendering technology. It was, we're drawing dots on paper, we're going to make shiny things on machines that shouldn't be able to do shiny things. So we did have a little intermediate step, which we actually needed for the rendering stuff. We built our own graphics editor. Photoshop had actually existed for about a year or two at this point, and we didn't use it because Rare doesn't use anybody else's stuff if we can help it. We just do it the hard way. We sit there at 3 o'clock in the morning and write the damn thing ourselves. So I wrote a graphics editor, which we then built a bunch of graphics machines based on the Raspberry arcade board and put my editor on there. And Heather and Kev and other people started using this to do basic drawing. It was our version of Photoshop. But then when things were being rendered at the SGI machines, this was the key tool then to then convert things and tidy them up to get them to the character assets that we needed for the consoles we were working on.
Was there a lot of hand tweaking at the end from the render?
I didn't work on any of the renders because I was literally, while I was in the building and saw the SGI machine coming in, drooling, because I was thinking, oh, this is the next bit that's going to make life easy. It wasn't long after that I actually left. The progression is, it's really weird because Paul's just talked about that experience of seeing something spinning around on screen. We had exactly the same experience at Core. We had all got 3D Studio Max given to us, and it was kind of like it was beautiful to use, and we were all, I think every artist that grew up with 8-bit and 16-bit games, they knew the struggle that it was to actually get something on screen, and we were like, yes, anything that makes your job easier, anybody in any profession is going to say this is a new tool that can make my job easier and make the final product look better. And I think once we all experienced that at the same time in two different companies in two different parts of the country, and we both had the same conclusion. How do we get what we're doing here, building these beautiful tombs or this architecture, how do we make this a playable game? And at the time, a very similar experience to you talking about the spinning Volkswagen, the Beetle. We actually saw a demo from Sony on the first PlayStation that they were about to release. And that was, I think it was the T-Rex.
Yeah.
They were spinning a T-Rex round. Ironically, we put a T-Rex in Tomb Raider just because we were all kind of like the same experience. How do we do this? And we ended up moving into in-house editors in exactly the same way as Rare were doing in conjunction.
Do you think your time at Rare, when they had these SGI machines early on, kind of enabled you to think like, right, this is going to happen at the other companies, and helped you get
I
so
certainly
used to
discussed it.
Yeah.
We were all on the cusp. I think we were all intuitive, but also there was things coming through media. We were all big into it. It was quite funny because somebody handed me a PC mag earlier to sign. It was a Tomb Raider mag. And it was just such a wonderful thing to have a physical PC mag again. You know, to hold it in my hands and sit there flicking through going, you know. And then that's the thing. We were all fairly well educated on the possibilities, but you needed a company that could invest in new dev tools. And I think we were both lucky. I think Core and Rare had the funds to move forward with that and make a bigger investment on buying more software and hardware for their teams.
Was it a big learning curve as well? Because you mentioned to me last night you had to learn Unix to use these machines.
So yeah, I mean, initially these machines were used for rendering. When we moved on to the N64, we developed on PCs before that, right? So when we moved to the N64, all the PCs went. Everybody got SGI machines. They were Unix based, so I had to learn Unix. Had to learn how to use an SGI machine. We also, for the programmers, for the software guys, we also stopped writing in assembly language. Pretty much everything up until that point had been written in assembly language. And we switched to C. Chris Sutherland knew C because he was educated. He went to university. The rest of us were thickos, so we had to learn C on the job, literally on the job, trying to write stuff. And at the same time, we were confronted with new possibilities for building these 3D worlds. And we didn't know what we were doing. So we had 3 teams at Rare, which ended up being the Banjo, Conker, and DK64 teams. And we were all locked away from each other in different barns and not really looking at what each other were doing. But we all had the exact same problem. How do you build a game in a world where you can move around and control the camera and everything? So everybody did exactly the same thing. They created an open space with infinitely high walls around it so you couldn't draw too far into the distance.
Yeah.
You'd have a character that you could walk around. You could move the camera around on another stick, and you'd have a prop, like a tree in the middle. And you'd look at it, you know, whole team had spent months putting this thing in, and you look at it and you spin the camera around and you'd run your character over there and you'd run him back near the tree. And then you go, how the hell are we going to write a game with that? And all 3 teams got to the same point. It's like, we don't know what we're doing at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I came in around just as that cusp, that transition was happening, and that I had a maths and computing degree, so it was a lot of it came from understanding, you know, from the leap from 2D to 3D. It's just not adding one extra D, and it's dead simple. It's the maths involved was a magnitude greater of complexity, and there was an awful lot of matrix calculations and 3Ds and quaternions and all this extra maths that all got added in.
See, he's educated.
So I was brought in a lot to do.
I'm Googling a lot of this when...
Yeah, so, you know, it was suddenly going, what's a quaternion? What's gimbal lock? Why suddenly do when I rotate something this way, and then suddenly I'm now rotating in 3 directions, but it's only going in 2 directions? It's all classical mathematical issues that is hit all 3D programmers at anyone programming in a 3D environment, and the whole company was based in 2D. So it was all very used to, there's still a concept of a down hit and a wall, but suddenly you're turning that into a 3D, and it's so much easier now that everyone just assumes there's a physics engine and there's rendering engines and a physics engine, and there's all these things are kind of come pre-solved with some very, very intelligent people making it very fast and very easy to use. But when we got it, it was literally, okay, we've got to figure all this out, we've got a few equations, and we've got to make this all work. And it's like, and the amount of time spent, people would just spend going, okay, well, this is a sphere, and I've got to make it. I've got this little bit of geometry which I now pop through, and everyone's like, right, okay, I'm sliding across this triangle here, and what happens when I intersect this, and how much pushback do we have? All that kind of stuff. We had to handwrite all of that from scratch. Of course, Rare did it the hard way, and we all wrote it independently without sharing any of this tech, or even all we were going is going, yeah, they popped through the background over there. Our engine wouldn't have done that. So, but that was all done from a thing of trying to make the best one better. Now, we never quite made the leap of going, okay, who did it best? Now let's share it with everyone else and make it all the best. But it was all kind of like done as independent companies. But that was always the stamp away to try and drive that feeling of entrepreneurship, and so we never sat back on our laurels. It was always there was the more competitive atmosphere to try and drive technology forward, as opposed to just everyone sitting back and
I guess it was quite DIY as well, and the whole idea of how do you put a storyline or actually make a game in this 3D environment, because you look at something like Super Mario 64, you've kind of got a basic storyline. It's quite a bare world. Like implementing that at Rare as well, and with Tomb Raider must have been quite a challenge.
What I find amazing is this comparison. Two different companies that didn't talk to each other almost at the same time came against the same problems and figured out the same way to solve those problems. Rare were super secretive. Core were very much more open door, but there was nobody we could ask in to help. Obviously, Chris, with your mathematical mind, you were like the version of Gavin we had at Core. So he was an ex-Cambridge graduate that studied AI, I think it was robotics, but he was a brilliant problem solver. And he took one look at the scenes we were creating in 3ds Max in the same way that you did and went, well, okay, I need to make something that's really, really basic that can allow our artists to load some textures in, to allow us to put a character into a 3D world. And you can all lock online, but we effectively ended up with a little editor that looked very much like how you'd build in Minecraft now, working on a grid-based system. And actually, that engine dictated the game, because we knew then that when we created a character to interact with that grid-based system, every animation could work to the grid. And that was phenomenal. We knew the distance it took from Lara to run, to jump, to catch a ledge. So it is fascinating. I haven't heard these guys' side of the story, and it's really weird that we're revolving in the same direction, aren't we, as two separate companies?
Yeah. And of course, Tomb Raider pushed the boundaries with what can be done with that, with water as well, because water, there was a lot of puzzles where things flooded and dropped down and things like that.
I discussed with a few people that there was one level in Tomb Raider which was called the cistern level that nearly broke me. Especially when one of the testers came back and said to me, we've just pulled the switch and all the crocodiles are in the sky.
Flying crocodiles. Yeah. That's terrifying.
So it was a level design around flooding the system and emptying the system. So yeah, all the crocodiles are in the ceiling.
Where did you source textures from? Were there various places you got them from?
So we are almost Pipette style days on the internet, and we had a slightly better connection at work, but you would literally be able to go and make a cup of tea if you were doing some research. But I was talking to a few people that are interested in art and graphics in games, and although it's really easy to do it all on Unreal and outsource everything, I think it's good to get back to basics. And we literally did walk around with cameras, really basic little cameras, and take pictures of different textures. A lot of the stuff we got from secondhand books. So we literally raided the secondhand bookstore and found as many old encyclopedias, Penguin books about history, and kind of, at least we had some images we could work to, because other than the TV, we had nothing.
We had it Rare because the internet didn't really exist. Then,
this is another thing.
Images about this, or you went to you really had a day trip to Waterstones or some whatever big bookstore there was in the UK to go and get a book on cats.
came out
So
with
you could
like-
get cat fur texture or something.
Yeah.
And we did all of the experiment with the digital cameras that suddenly came out, and you would go out
Exactly
taking
the same.
pictures of a chamois leather, which I use for
Yeah.
more skin or whatever. But
Yeah, exactly the same.
take it for granted.
So there
now.
you go. Same problems, same solution, and no communication between us.
And also at Rare, they only had one machine that was connected to the internet because they were so secretive. They couldn't let anything, slip out or anything like that. So we had one machine, it was in a locked away little room. You had to have a form that you filled in with your business reason and what you wanted to search for. So like sign into the room, go up and do your one search.
Ridiculous.
And because it's not just like you have the problem with textures and source references. We have problems like you're going, oh, how does this complex bit of maths work, or what's a really good fast way of doing this. The closest we had was SIGGRAPH books, so we actually went, and because I remember when we went to E3 and I was chatting to Chris Stamper, and we had a few reference SIGGRAPH books, which was like it was a computer graphics books and they're like papers. It was like physics papers, but for computer graphics. And what we discovered was that SIGGRAPH papers were cutting edge. They were like bleeding edge. It's like the SGI sort of rendering sort of tech, something that an N64 would never hope to do. But what we realized that at the time, SIGGRAPH 1998 or whatever was cutting edge. But if we went back about 10 years in these SIGGRAPH papers, that tech was now something that was feasible on the processing that we use now. So we could look back 10 years of SIGGRAPH papers and start going, oh, okay, this thing that would have run at like 1 frame a second at the time is now getting closer to something. This is an algorithm that maybe we can use. So we all poured over all these various different little graphic tricks and things and saying, oh, can we do that now? Can we use the SP processor, which was like the equivalent of like the graphics card sort of thing that was used to, can we actually then throw some stuff onto there and do some clever little workings out? Can we change how because the problem is, not only did we have the SG, it was all done on Silicon Graphics. The instruction booklet. Oh yeah,
it was a doorstop, wasn't it?
It's like a doorstop. It was like this. I remember my first day at Rare. I was locked up in I went to a little room. There's me and Sean Pyle. He went in that room. I went in that room like that, and they just went. Learn that. It was like really complex. So SP processor. This is how the vertex compression worked, and all this. This is how we break it all down. And we were all there terrified, trying to make some kind of demo, trying to make spinning triangles and all that sort of stuff. So that was all the references that we had. And later on, as we tried to push the hardware of the N64. And we were trying to make it do some really clever stuff and get into the low level stuff of the SP card. This was well beyond what the reference manual did, and we had to go to the source code of the thing that took the code from the computer, from the CPU, pushed it onto the SP, and there was some code that ran, and it had some comments in there to sort of explain what was going on and how they did it, because we wanted to change how it worked, which is why Conquer is so hard for emulators to work, because we changed what the default settings for everything was so that we could do all this clever stuff for all shading and all that sort of stuff on it. And it was great, but it was in Japanese. so all the comments were in Japanese, and I went... So fortunately, Tony Wong was one of the programmers on here, and he knew Japanese pretty well. But we were all sitting there trying to translate what all this Japanese was, trying to figure out what the hell was going on here, how to change it. So we did most of it on hard mode, pretty much.
I guess those decisions as well, over time were kind of, if you look at Banjo, you had less items in there, and then Conkers was a much richer world because you knew about the techniques and the ways of implementing it. How did that affect artistic decisions?
Well, yeah, I mean, we had, as I was saying, we used a lot of stuff to try and push. We wanted like the shading to work well, and how once again you could do all sorts of clever things with the SP processor to try and reduce memory so we could do it in a smaller amount of space, and how we packed all the bits inside this little line of bits that we had to do everything with. Can we get the vertices inside there, and then the color information and the UV mapping and all this kind of stuff, and what information could we hide in there, and then how can we then map up the textures to sort of like maybe make his eyes blink, and we did all the vertex blending to do Conker's mouth to sort of make, so we had the full sort of AEIOU sort of part of that. So that informed, because we were constantly pushing the tech to try and make that as powerful as possible. We pushed the animation code, which we brought over from GoldenEye, once again back to Quaternions. I remember it was me and Mark Betteridge. I sort of knew the Massey side. He was incredibly good at doing, talking about assembler, that rewrote that in assembler because it was such an integral part to try and make that as fast as possible. So so Mark Betteridge incredibly good at doing incredibly fast, tight, optimized assembly code, and I wrote the C version of it, and it was just me and Mark just sat in a room for several months, and we going through like, this is what that's doing, and he would sit there and twirl his hair and go, okay, and just like a little bit more like that, and then it would like make a little bit of sense, and then we had these things called NOPs, which are no operands, and that's when you did a branch. You could go, well, if I'm going to come here and I'm going to make a decision, left or right, if you chose one way to do the jump, then that was a free bit of space. So you could do a bit of operations further down that you get that for free. So what basically, it was like taking a fairly readable bit of assembly code that was sort of like made a bit of sense, and then you basically put it into a blender and you just chucked all these operations back up here that made it completely unreadable and unusable to sort of like debug, but they made it faster, and speed was the king for every single decision that we made. So we had to make it as fast as possible to try and do that sort of stuff.
Talking about speed as well, I mean, that's one thing. Obviously, games were getting bigger then. There's a lot more going into them. And I guess, obviously, when you were doing PlayStation games and Sega Saturn at core versus the N64, which was a cartridge-based system, I mean, obviously, CD-ROMs are slow medium. How did you kind of cope with that, the amount of data you had to transfer and not have the player wait around too long and disrupt the game?
Well, we just disrupted the game and people had to wait till it was loading. No, we had a certain guideline. We knew what we were capable of building, and some levels got so huge that they were literally chopped because people didn't want the latency. I think Neil Boyd did a level which was based on a sunken ship, the Fathoms level. It was supposed to be one level. It ended up being 3. So again, you play the level. One of the biggest problems we had on the PlayStation was clipping, so we had to make sure how much we were drawing. You weren't getting any like polygons popping all over the place. And that's one of the reasons our room editor was really designed to make passageways and corridors to avoid that. But that was always abused anyway. I mean, Toby Gard decided to build a level one day, and he decided to take all our nice little rooms that were supposed to be joined together to avoid any clipping or draw distance problems, and just bolt them all together and make one enormous cavern with a huge sphinx in the middle of it. And me and Neil were there, having been told, keep it to nice little passageways. And we were just going, Toby just built a great big giant sphinx, and Lara's like that big on its foot. But he was very, very clever about it because he thought about what angle Lara was approaching it and how to use lighting to darken areas.
Yeah.
So again, every problem you get, you try to find a way of solving it.
I wonder as well, because Tomb Raider came out in the Sega Saturn as well, which from memory, it doesn't use polygons, does it? It's quads.
Yeah, that's right.
Developing a game for both systems at the same time and learning this new technology.
Well, hence I think why it didn't get a Tomb Raider 2.
Yeah.
Because by Tomb Raider 2, we'd already developed the engine we were using, our little room editor, to work with triangles, so we could get, we could divide that quad again. So we were no longer working in little squares anymore. We could tip a corner and we could create a bit of shape. Same with Lara. She started off quite quaddy and ended up quite pointy by Tomb Raider 2.
Also, you had speech as well, which, in Banjo, it was completely different. Yeah. You kind of had some space limitations with that. So,
the N64 and cramming sound samples in. It's a good job.
It is possible.
Yeah, I know. It was tight. But, we just had Chris Sutherland making weird beepy noises that got processed into quite short segments. So got away with it.
Yeah. And you did some of the sounds for Lara?
Yeah. Didn't we all have a go at doing some sounds for Lara last time we spoke in your podcast? I don't hold my hand up to doing anything in the FMVs. We got professional actresses in for that, but being on a budget and not really knowing if this game was going to be very successful, I literally had Martin, one of our sound guys, come up to me and say, "Can you come and record some sounds for Lara Croft?" So I said, "All right, no problem." And I spent most of the afternoon laughing, actually, because one of the first things he asked me to do was the strain sound, so that when Laura pushes the block, she strains.
Got to recreate those.
I went through that with Evelyn when we did the Killer Instinct sound.
It's amazing.
It's not easy to do.
You do spend most of the time laughing. It's the hardest thing to take seriously in the world. Like, what?
I think also yourself and me, they both being from the Midlands.
You don't want that Brummie accent, Lee.
I just sounded like a Brummie ninja when I was younger.
Luckily, I didn't have to say much.
Ouch! Oh,
Yeah.
Get off! Oh yeah.
Thank
We
God
should
they
have done
didn't use
that.
me for the FMBs. That's all I could say. Otherwise, Laura would be sounding like this. No, so ta-ra in a bit. Anyway, all the so all those and all them and me. So, and I think they were going to record them again with the professional actresses for Tomb Raider 2 and just couldn't be bothered. So I think I'm in both of them, but I don't know. But the only thing I couldn't do was scream. I've never been a little girl that could scream, and I can remember spending ages just going, and that's when they sort of brought somebody in who knew how to scream. I couldn't believe it because I was standing outside the studio at the time, and this woman just like, my blood drained out of my body. I thought, that's how you scream. And that was the scream that went into Tomb Raider.
Do you also think after the success of these 3D titles, you saw lots of people, well, everything trying to become 3D? And
it was a natural progression. Everybody wanted to be 3D anyway.
Yeah.
You know, you always wanted to push the technology that little bit further. I mean, look at where we are now with VR. And VR's not even, I don't think it's reached its full potential yet. I think using it in games is not VR's full potential. Its full potential is allowing people to visit places they would never normally be able to go. There's no reason why we shouldn't all experience what standing at the top of Everest is like, or in those little back rooms of the Vatican where nobody can go. You should be able to walk these places and explore them.
I think also what you started to see more and more 3D rendered or more and more polygonal graphics on the front covers of magazines. And I can remember when we did do it was Donkey Kong model, and we did a couple of other things. I think it may even been the Killer Instinct demo. And I can remember Tim came in and looked, and you looked at it yourself, and we were very fortunate because we had the backing and the funding from Nintendo to supply us with all these machines. But I can remember looking at the screen and somebody said we actually felt sorry for the other companies, because I thought if I had been at another company and we were pixelating everything by hand the way we were, or it didn't matter how great your editor was, it was still going to look like very great Capcom art or whatever, but it didn't look like 3D rendered or a polygonal model which we'd managed to put some textures on, and we were very fortunate to be able to do that because we had the funding, but it's like I wouldn't want it to be at any other company at that time because I thought we were really going to fall behind. But we were both fortunate.
And you think just jumping straight into it really helped, and embracing the technology, where there were some great companies that kind of fell to the wayside when 3D came and suddenly looked very old-fashioned.
Yeah. But I suppose that the handheld market was still kind of supported.
Yeah.
But then we even discovered that you didn't need any more than 3 colors to support an accurate rendition of, say, Killer Instinct or Donkey Kong once it was broken down, providing you'd got some kind of constant moving sprite. Sometimes you'd look at a sprite, if you'd render it down, I can't tell what it is. But when it span and you play the whole sequence, you think, what's that pixel doing now? I would never draw this here. But when you saw that the computer was obviously figuring out where the shadow is going to go, it all made sense. And when we're just coming back to the 3D rend stuff, you asked if we did a lot of tweaking. If you started to mess with what was rendered, it stood out like a sore thumb. If I've got my hand rotating and I don't like the way this is happening here, so I'll touch that up with what color I think. All you saw was it rendered, and then you suddenly see this bit coming on, and so you couldn't touch. Well, you could, but you had to be very careful with all of that. And so we had the power to be able to say, well, render it again, do it again. And like for other people without a rendering dedicated rendering machine or anything like that, it would have been a nightmare because we had to wait all night for a sequence of 50 frames to render or whatever. So
we were the same.
Company without that, it was
we were exactly the same. It was always at the point where we lit our levels that we knew that was the time to just, you wanted to, you were giving up the will sometimes, especially if you'd got a bug report and there was a problem with the level that you were sorting, and you'd waited a day for it to render the whole level to render, and then that bug was still there. It's like, oh, no. And same in most of the 3D modeling tools at the time, the render time was ridiculous, wasn't it?
We had these two huge SGI machines about the size of a double height fridge. One was called Jabba and the other was called the Death Star. Yeah. And they were in one of our barns, and they had to be treated carefully, and it was the only place in the whole of Rare that actually had air conditioning. We all had to sweat in the summer, but these two machines were given aircon, and they would be set off to just render all night. And we'd come in the next morning and they'd have fallen over and stopped rendering, and it's like, oh, there's another 24 hours of wasted time, basically.
Yeah, it was awful, wasn't it?
Yeah, and there'd be big queues of stuff to render, and they'd just plow through them one at a time overnight. And you'd come in. Then, of course, if anybody needed to tweak things because they didn't like it, they'd have to get back on the queue and then wait for ages again. Yeah. You know, it's not like stuff was happening quickly at people's desks on their own smaller machines, which really weren't going to hack it.
And it wasn't just rendering that we used. Art was... We always like, if it needs art doing, the programmers do not get to play on Death Star. But obviously, we tried to jump in as many times because we have to compile the game, and the game would take a long time to compile. It's like all these files going through, and they were alphabetical. I remember on Conquer we had all the files coming through, and then we put one named about the right thing and it just went, time to make a cup of tea.cpp, and it was just you knew that came, and that was about right. You had about enough time to make a cup of tea, and then it would, so we would play around that, because we worked on distributed compiling at times, so we could go off and use these mega machines to try and distribute the compile out to try and split up the time and save it. But obviously, you know, quite often it would be used because we were doing rendering or whatever. But another thing that was used on Conquer, I'm not even sure everyone really knew that this existed. One of the reasons the Conquer ran so fast, we had this really clever system that we came up with. I didn't come up with it, but it was very clever. That was, it split the level up into cubes, but it wasn't. It used a quad tree, so it was like, here's a big cube because it's a big empty area, but this got a lot of detail. And it dropped it all down, and for every single one of those cubes, it would look at every single other one of those cubes and decide whether, and fire rays off to decide whether it's obscured. So then, and that would take forever. It was a massive, massive compute task that would generate these octrees, and every octree would know every other cube that it could see or not see. And then every single polygon would know which bit of the octree it was in. And then very quick. So once we'd done that huge amounts of mashing of computation, we could then put the camera anywhere in the scene and know exactly what was visible from that point and what wasn't. So we had incredibly cheap culling, because as you move through this octree, it would then choose to cull. So because rendering was the most expensive thing, and we could say, well, at this point we know that all of this you can't see.
That's right. Yeah. Don't have it in scene.
Yeah, don't have it in the scene. If you don't have to see it, you don't have to render it.
Like film scene, really.
Yeah.
Just show what you need to show.
So we had this fascinating thing. You could fly through and you'd see the scene just disappearing and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, otherwise you'd have to just like painter's algorithm, or, you know, just do it in order, and you'd get all this overdraw that was happening. So that was one of the big things that sped up Conquer. Would be useful if we shared information. That would have been a good thing to have, wouldn't it?
Was storage an issue at all as well? Like, if you're rendering so many files and you've got to store stuff locally.
That's an interesting point. I'm not sure how much disk space there was in those Death Stars.
Hard drives were very small back then.
They were very small.
We were dealing with massive files. So, yeah, it would have been. Yeah.
And you had to be at the physical location. You couldn't send them off to anyone. No.
There was no work from home. Everybody was in close proximity to those machines. Yeah. Basically, you had to go and just give them a physical kick anyway.
Yeah, I mean, back in those times, the hard drives that we would have been using were like big things. Now, before I came to work at Rare, I worked for IBM on a year out when I was at university. I worked, it was IBM, eventually became a place called Zyrotex. It was down in Portsmouth. And they made the big hard disks. They were platters. They were like massive records that would get stacked up like this, and they were big things. And then they'd have the clean rooms where you'd go and you'd be wearing all the outfits to go and test that sort of stuff. And they had like semi clean rooms where it was like, it's called an air shower, that would just like drop air down onto it and allows people to fix them, because they'd come in to be like repaired. They'd have to change a platter or whatever, or change something, and it could be done in a half clean environment. And these things are like this. And I remember one day I'd come in and I was having a look at them, and it was they had these discs. They said, "Oh yeah, these are the ones they're using on Jurassic Park." And it was the Jurassic Park had about 20 of these. Just I can't remember. There was a large number of these massive things. It's what they were storing all the rendering data for Jurassic Park, which I mean, that's my little cool claim to fame. I touched Jurassic Park on their hard drives.
Well, we're going to give the audience a chance to ask some questions in a minute, so have a think. Before that, I'm wondering, obviously, Kevin, Heather, you were there in the early days when it was still the 8 and 16-bit platforms, and then how did character design approach change when 3D came in? What considerations did you have to make, and how did it change?
We had been spoiled when we were doing the Donkey Kong stuff and the Killer Instinct. We could use as many curves and textures and materials and effects as we wanted, and then suddenly I had actually had some time off because I had a car accident and spent some time with my leg in plaster. But when I came back, all of my buddies had gone to move on to the N64. And I didn't know a thing about what to do on it. And I can remember I came to see Chris Seaver and said, what do you do on this? And I started building fighting characters, which were going to be for what I envisioned as another Killer Instinct game with younger, sort of cooler, almost like Ranma half sort of thing. And I built them out of NURBS, as we did, to start rendering them up. I thought, well, it'll probably be sprite-based. And then I remember we had the Virtua Fighter machine, which was obviously a 3D polygonal fighter, and I thought, well, we can do something like this and break my characters down to slightly more boxy versions of my NURBS renders, but it'll be fine because I'll render out all the textures just like and use those rendered textures and have this amazing looking 3D rendered texture across a lower resolution 3D model. And then I tried rendering out textures at quite large resolution, expecting to be able to use the same kind of resolution textures I was using to make Donkey Kong's fur texture or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then Chris Seaver said to me, no, you can have a 32 by 64. I said, what, for each? He said, no, you can have a 32 by 64. That'll be for Conker's head and body. I says, well, where do you put all the details? You don't. You might render a button and try and keep the rest of the character sort of clean, solid color so that you can move that button around anywhere without getting this. Sometimes the N64 games, you associate them with looking a little bit muddy because the mapping and the low quality and low resolution of the texture as it went into the distance, things start to look very brown. And so when we did Diddy Kong Racing, then I tried to keep everything sort of super bright primary colors. And say, for instance, Drumstick, he was just red polygons here with a yellow button texture on him because that was all we could do. And you sort of had to, we were spoiled from having curves and textures to suddenly have to go down to triangles and colors. Mm. And then all of a sudden, your model, which looked great from this angle, and suddenly realize your model looked awful from the back, which you never saw because I didn't care what Donkey Kong's backside looked like because you never saw it. But when he was running around in DK64, you saw it and you'd never thought about that design characteristic. Oh God, it looks like a chicken on a barbecue from the back. But when you see him from the side, it looks like an ape. So you kind of had to think a little bit harder about designing your character, making sure that it read well from different angles, and also that how am I going to texture this with such a small resolution? Right, you? Did you find
that? So you're asking somebody who really had a passion in architecture and doing the levels. But I can tell you that obviously I know about how characters were created, especially from what I was watching our animators doing. Had similar problems, but alongside the room editor that we had, we also had an anim editor, which was also really clever and helped our animators. So Toby would work in a wireframe with an origin on Lara Croft. But what that wireframe allowed was having a customizable area at the bottom of the screen where you could create your textures actually in the anim editor. So we could draw on the unwrapped UV mapping from the wireframe character. So literally, and Stu had a very similar situation, and so did Toby Gard, was trying to cram these little pixels into what was the triangles and the quads that were effectively ripped out of this wireframe model. So you could draw on the fly. You weren't necessarily constrained with trying to work too much in the 3D Max system of of wrapping, unwrapping textures. So that was really cool. But again, it was one of those problem-solving moments of how do you get something that was a simple thing to do in 2D into a 3D environment. So you had to have the ability to sort of make it a simpler version of 3ds Max, where you could put an origin on a character and spin it around to see it from all angles. And also by having that origin, that was the key link between the anim editor and the room editor, was because the origin dictated how she interacted in her world as well. So my world of these block-based grids, the same format existed effectively in the anim editor, so they knew when they animated the distance she could cross and the distance she could interact when we loaded her into the room editor. But again, just two tools for two different jobs that worked side by side.
And it's also interesting how tech can interplay with art. So I remember one of the things that we developed for Conquer, if you have a look at a lot of the levels on Conquer, there's not many hard edges between things. There's hard edges on polygons, but there's not many hard edges. Like, for example, on the windmill level, like on the path going up, the path actually blends out into the grass. And we developed a way that allowed for one polygon. Normally, a polygon, you place on a polygon, and that polygon has one texture, and the texture has UV maps, and that is what the texture looks like on that polygon. We developed a system that allowed you to apply two textures on the same polygon and have one blend out into the other for the cost of a normal polygon, because normally the only other way of doing that is to have two polygons, one sitting on top of each other and one blending out as a transparency to try and make that a nice easy edge. But of course that puts a rim of the world's most expensive polygons, which is transparencies, which everyone tries to avoid all the way anywhere you wanted to sort of have this blend out area. But because we developed this tech, suddenly all our artists could suddenly go, oh my God, so I can now blend things out and it doesn't cost a huge amount. So, because normally games that don't have that tech would have to put that little transparent edge on it, and that has an effect on the draw speed, and therefore they have to reduce the polygons. So all these things have a positive spiraling impact on each other to allow that tech to just keep pushing that boundary of what you can draw in ways that someone playing the game would never know. They just go, oh, that's nice. It's really hard to do, or really expensive, and making it both is making it one without the other is quite tricky.
I'm sure everything we've been talking about here has hopefully spurred the audience to have some questions they want to ask to our panel. So if you have got some questions, put your hands up, and we'll come over with a microphone.
You mentioned technical limitations and new software and hardware developing as you worked. Have you ever had an idea or a concept for a game that you would love to make, but you couldn't because it ended on the cutting room floor due to technical limitations or time that you would have loved to develop further?
I mean, it tends not to be entire games. They tend to be like you'd have one concept for a game and then you break that down into levels, and it's the levels that get dropped and like concepts for levels, because most designers like what I call the 1,000 elephants, which is like, yes, I'm going to have 1,000 elephants. They end up with like 1 or 2 elephants by the time they're finished. But the original design is the 1,000 elephant design. And then you work through and you say, well, what can and you can't do? And it either is, do we want to put time into working on the tech that will make that work? I always think back to Doom and its steps and things like that they couldn't do, and they had to work out an entire new rendering engine that would allow steps, which is insane to think of. But it's that sort of thing where either the tech's got to catch up, or you change your design, or you change the look. And it tends to be a little triangle, and you've got to have one or the other. But I don't know of any specific cases where like
I don't think we ever did. I mean, you've got racing games on the NES, you've got racing games on platforms today. Okay, it's how much you push the hardware with the art, with the audio, and everything else. When we could, we started getting sampled playback software in Game Boys and things. To play back animal noises and other things when the technology was there to do it. But we've never dropped anything because we couldn't technically do it.
Mainly because it was just a really bad idea for a game, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's usually
there was a lot of those.
Usually it drops a lot earlier than
that. There was six months in and you're just going, this is just not going to work. It wasn't a technical issue, it was a non-playability issue.
Yeah, sometimes games lose their way. The people working together just don't quite get the angle that's going to be good for a game. And, we've dropped things. Kev and I worked on a wrestling game about 32 years ago, Wrestle Rage on the Super NES. And we just dropped it in the end because we we just weren't tracking in the right direction. You went on to do Killer Instinct after that, you know.
That was happening more and more as the graphic capabilities got better, because you envision something, and often when it comes out, we'd play it and say, we're just doing it. But on the NES, when you got a much more limited system, it was more about just the dyno. You should be able to write a great game with a cube and a sphere. You know, you don't need good graphics. And I think you got distracted by the Super Nintendo by, yes, we had the Mode 7 and we could spin things around, but we also had so many more colors and we could make things look so much more shaded. And the screenshot might look great, but if the game wasn't any good, it got canned. And sometimes it felt like an awful shame because it looked great, but we didn't release it. It never got any further because it just... I think that's key just in game design, full stop. And it's happening. It happens all the time. You will download a game that looks like you're playing in a cinematic role, but is it fun? And this is the key thing. You've got to always remember, it doesn't matter how good it looks. It's got to play well. It's got to be fun to play.
And of course, when we have quite often with the level when you're sort of going, okay, you nail the gameplay down and then you get the full graphics up, and more likely the thing that will, it's very rare that we dump an entire level because of it, but you'd be playing around and you go, right, the frame rate's dropped to 20 here. Why is it dropped to frame? Is it on the GPU? Oh, okay, right. And you look around and you're going, so, and the ways to fix that is either make your game faster or reduce the graphics, and we go, okay, we've done this here and we wanted this view. Okay, can I get rid of the polygons here and draw it as a flat texture that is now just a picture of a mountain instead of modeling a mountain, or that sort of stuff? Or it'll either be, speed, or it'll be memory. You'll go over there and bang, it now just stops because we ran out of memory loading all this sort of stuff in. And once again, there's just crazy, we invariably came up with crazy ways to try and fix that. We had on Conquer, because we were cartridge based, not CD-ROM based, so we could do insane things with memory swapping, because it is basically just plugging in a bit of RAM into the computer and then it starts running it. We had these really beautiful backgrounds. You know, when you look at the skybox, it wasn't a skybox. We were talking about the textures being absolutely teeny tiny. So on Conquer, we have these beautiful skyboxes of all the level, and you could go on the top of the tower and look around and see all the different areas of that. Each one of that is one massive texture, well, massive at the time, it was a massive texture, chopped up into little squares and then rendered as to little squares all the way along on there. But they were so big, we couldn't fit it anywhere near in memory. So what we do is, as we were looking at the skybox, and we'd scroll as you move the camera around, we were literally just in time loading the next strip of textures, throwing them out the back. So we only ever had this amount of texture in memory. So you think you're just looking around. Actually, we're doing... So it's like a swan, it's like pedaling. All of the feet are pedaling underneath as we're chucking textures out this side and loading them in, which is something you could do with cartridge. You could never do with CD-ROM, just because it would just take so long to load it all back up again. So there's always ways and means. Where I always remember we always fighting against running out of memory overall, of actual RAM, the 4 mega RAM that's inside the thing, not the RAM in the cartridge. And the N64 had a very good video upscaling part. It was just built in, as it was just something that it could do. And as we're developing the game throughout, we get like a year in and run out of memory. We go, okay, we're going to strip a pixel off the render buffer and the Z buffer. We'll just take a little strip of pixels off and then just stretch the screen up a little bit, and that gave you all that memory back to use for code and all the models and all that kind of stuff. And then you'd hit it again and go, can we take another? Okay, we're going to take another strip of pixels off around the edge, and we go save all that kind of stuff. So, there's ways and means.
I think we have time for one more question.
Hi. I was wondering about the anti-piracy of different types of rare games, like, for example, Banjo-Kazooie 2 or Banjo-Tooie. What kinds of tricks and...
we didn't really do anti-piracy stuff back then.
There was definitely stuff on Conquer. Well, there was something in the chip, I think it was built in, and it had some stuff that you had to read at a certain point, and if you read it, you could tell whether it was off an official cartridge or not. It was some secret bit of memory that you'd go and access. Because on Conquer, the whole point is that you want to, with all anti-piracy, you don't necessarily want the pirate to know that at the point that we've discovered you're a pirate, for them to know, because then it's very easy for them. Well, very easy. It's a lot easier for them to go, if we just instantly went, bam, okay, you've walked over here, we've detected you're a pirate, we just rip the game down. So we don't. We just make a note of it, and we go, right, okay, we're going to start playing with them. So Conquer we disabled all the level warps. So you'd be wandering around and then suddenly you'd be going grinding, trying to walk through the level warp, which would take you to the next level. And we just disabled it. And we like made things harder. We started like trolling people. So we knew it was happening and just made the game slowly more and more unplayable as we detected it from the start.
Yeah, I think in fact one of the classic things people used to do back then was sort of infinite lives pokes, so that you never died. You know, if you start a game with 3 lives, and you can find a way to disable them going down every time you die, then you can just play indefinitely, and you could complete the game quite easily. I do seem to remember writing a system once where we tracked your lives in several different places in the code base with different bits of software and tried to obfuscate it so that it wasn't obvious what it was doing. And then if any of these values didn't correlate, and it wouldn't say 3, it might be some completely different number. It was counting from a different base, like 100 or something, in one place, and it would be doing something different somewhere else. And if these numbers didn't correlate, it was game over.
Heather, as well, what about piracy with the PlayStation? Because they had the mod chip, didn't they? And
we had it all, didn't we? We had a naked Lara, never existed. We did have a little bit of secret code in there, something to do with our birthdays. But I can't honestly remember, but there was something to do with Lara's Manor. Something happened to Winston on our birthdays, and so there was always little things like that. But as far as piracy is concerned, no, I don't think we had any issues with that. Not that I'd know. It really would be a management question.
We were very overconfident on the Conquer when we first put it out, because there's the cheat code when you go into the imp and you type the cheat code and it goes, "You cheating bastard," whilst you and so we had a bunch of cheat codes that, once again, thinking about it, was probably we had a lot to do. In our defence, we had a lot to do, and we came to the cheat code menu, and there was these strings in memory that would be, these are the cheat codes, and this is what it does, and it unlocks various chapters and blah 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 blah. And so we went, oh well, just in case, instead of just storing them as strings straight across, what we'll do, we like to have a table and store them straight down like that, so that instead of it being, if you're ever reading through memory, you're not reading the cheat code as the cheat code. You're reading all of the first letter of all the cheat codes, then the second letter of all the cheat codes. Brilliant. We'll never do that. Within 1 week, every single cheat code was out on Conquer because they just like look sideways or something like that. So they went, oh yeah, look, if you read it straight down in a hex editor, it reads out like that.
They were really easy to break, weren't they? And people used to literally sit there going XX, Y.
Yeah.
I mean, we had an in-game cheat code for developers just so we could fly Lara through the levels, things like that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if anybody ever could effectively get to it on when the games were released, but it was certainly our in-house cheat.
Yeah, well, we had those sort of cheats that we had on there. I mean, a lot of the fly through, that sort of stuff. You tend to when you do your final build, you strip all that out, so all those things are there. But the cheat codes one, we left one in because we went, no one's ever going to find this. It was just a string of random characters, because it was the one that would expose the entire editor, all the debugging, the SP debugging, everything like that, the full thing that we used for proper. We made the final build, it crashes. When you could look at all the text, it was everything like that. Of course, we use our highly uncrackable system of putting them this way down. Within a week, they came out, and we thought, this is still fine, because you can't, you can crash the game, but it only happened when the game crashed. And then literally, within a week, not only did they say you type in this ridiculously long cheat code, you then just lift the cartridge slightly off there, just so one of the pins don't quite hit. So then all the DMA accesses where it's asking for data just fail. It checksums and just crashes the game. And so you can crash any N64 game at will by just slowly pulling the cartridge out. Then you put this cheat code in, pull that little thing out, and then suddenly the entire highly confidential SP code was just exposed to everything. It was on the final room. So probably should have taken that out, shouldn't we? It was one of those, because you get one shot at it, it goes out, and then I think at the end we're going, we did take that out, right? Yeah, we did. Of course we did. Of course we'd have done that for the final ROM. No, we didn't. It was all out there. Oh well, you can have a good look through the SP code.
Well, some amazing insights as always. And just a reminder, if you did miss any of the panels over the weekend, or you want to hear them again, we are going to be putting them on our podcast. Search for the Retro Hour on Spotify, Apple, all the usual places. In the meantime, though, Heather, Kev, Chris, and Paul, thank you so much.
Thank you.